Third meeting of the planning commission. First agenda is, on the item is approval of the minutes that are in your packet.
I'll make that motion.
Second. Got a second? Any further discussion? So, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? So moved. Bill, you have anything?
No.
Bruce? No. Larry? Timmy?
No.
Yeah?
No.
Okay. Unfinished business, Chad, you have anything?
No.
Alrighty, moving to the zoning appeals case.
Yeah. So first one is SE 305. This is an application submitted by St. Moritz Properties to allow the construction of 6 indoor boat storage buildings. Property is located at 686 Harvey Peninsula Road, tax map 59, parcel 560, lot 17, zone Lake Residential 1. I think there's some of those floating around there. So this is an existing boat storage. There's several buildings there already. It's a special exception use in the zoning ordinance, so anytime you change the character or extent of an existing special exception, you have to go back to the board for another special exception. So they're adding more. I think on the one site plan coming around, you can see some of the, it's color coded, some of the existing ones and the proposed.
Did you do this?
No.
Did you say they're adding all 6 of them?
Yes, it'll be 6.
Question for you, do they have different setbacks for those kind of buildings?
I think it's 40 foot on those. And you're supposed to submit your questions ahead of time so I can answer them and look smart. So it is different for boat storage. It's 40 front, 40 rear, and 20 side.
Oh, okay.
For indoor or for boat storage as a primary use. So if this were just your house, you know, and you wanted to put an accessory building, you have very relaxed standards for that. But for boat storage as a primary use, it's a stricter setback.
You have any problems with it, Chad? Everything in order?
Yeah, it'll be up to the board to decide if it's in harmony with the neighborhood and meets all the special exception requirements. So it's a special exception, so the zoning board seeks the opinion of the planning commission. So if you guys have anything formal you want to send
My only
them.
concern, I mean, it's always been a concern, is we got that split lot there with them taking across the road to put the boats and stuff in. That's always been been lucky nobody's, I mean, that's just the way it is.
Nobody's hit the what do you call that thing? The
Forklift?
Forklift.
Yeah.
With the boat.
hit the boat on the forklift.
When I come through there, Dale just lift it up and let me through, you know?
Yeah.
You guys have any opinion on this, Bruce? Anything to say?
Special exception, it's continuing of the use that's there, I don't see a problem with it.
Well, send it on down then.
Okay.
Next
For
one,
these,
Chad.
I usually just put in the minutes like no formal comments were then submitted to the zoning board. Next one's a variance. This is submitted by Deep Creek Lakeside Properties for a variance to allow the construction of a single-family residence to within 23 feet of the front and rear property lines. It's located at Highwood Drive in McHenry, tax map 50, parcel 677, lot T, grid 21, zone Lake Residential 1. So for this one, typical setbacks, I think there's some other site plans here.
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
So this one's kind of a narrow lot. Typically, you would have 40-foot front setback, 40-foot rear on that one. It's a pretty narrow lot there, so they're going within 24 of the front and 24.53 of the rear.
Where in the world Highwood Drive?
Off of Rock Lodge here, like past JR Drive.
Ah, okay, I know where you're at now.
I had to look it up.
There's some small lots up there, aren't there?
Yeah, it's only 84, you can see it's only 84 foot deep total, so by the time you would take a normal 40-foot front and rear, you've got a 4-foot building envelope. And the ordinance does say variances. It gives the board some direction on when they can grant variances, and it talks about narrow, shallow, steep lots, things like that. So
Seems like a pretty reasonable request under the circumstances.
They're looking at just the rentals. I know that they put the parking lot in there with 4 parking spaces.
I don't know if we've got into it to that deep yet. I haven't really talked to them.
I just find usually you don't see a plot that shows designated parking for a resident, like they show an area, you know.
Yeah, I haven't talked to them, so I don't know if they'll rent it or not. The only difference is if they were to rent it, you need one parking place for every bedroom. If it's not a rental, you need one space for every other bedroom. But we always recommend people to, because it may be rented in the future, go ahead and put a little extra parking in if you can.
You guys have any problem with this one?
Not that I'm aware of.
Billy? Timmy? Okay, moving on, Chad.
Okay. Oh, we got some subdivision plats. There should be a group of them. Poland Run East. They did them on individual plats, but there's 4 different lots. Lots 1, 3, 5, and 8. These are all along 1,000 Acres Road, existing road. So these are, it's a 9-lot subdivision. It's already been given preliminary approval. They've already had a final approval on a couple of the lots. They're just submitting 4 more. There's a little bit of sewer infrastructure, and they dropped off a check for that to guarantee that that gets done. So we're good on that end. Public utilities will make sure that gets installed correctly, but that will allow them to record it.
These are all golf course properties, right?
Yeah, and this was a cluster subdivision, so they're allowed to go under an acre. They have 25% of the overall tract is open space, so that's why they're allowed to go down below an acre on this.
Anybody have any concerns with these? Chad, is there any problems you know coming up, or is it for
No, I think, for us, it's kind of simple because it's an existing road, so there's no road infrastructure or anything like that. We just have to keep an eye on the sewer and water infrastructure, make sure that gets extended to them, but there'll be financial security in place for that.
Is it the first of the 9 or just the last of the 9?
I think these are the first couple. We did preliminary approval, it was May 4th, 2022. But I think these will be the first of the ones actually recorded.
Any other questions, Bruce? Motion approved. Motion second.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? So moved, Chad.
Okay. And the next one is Rocklick Creek Estates. This one's been going on for a long time. Probably all remember this one. It's been given final approval. There's just 2 more lots that they want to approve. So lot 13 and 14, they're now bringing for final approval. We've already been out, looked at the roads. Roads are all good. Bond's been released, so just submitting 2 more for final approval.
This is up on that Holschneider property.
Yes.
That we had so much issues with the entrance road, right, for several years. Is that the same property?
Yeah, you can see that Henfling Road is technically, or it's actually a county road. They had issues with whether they actually fronted on it. That was one of the issues. They finally got some property from Mr. Fike. There were also issues with the angle there. They got some waivers from.
Right.
You know, it actually turned out pretty nice. I drove up in there the other day. I had to go up and see somebody. It actually turned out.
Yeah, they did a
all
nice
paved and
job
everything, right.
on the roads.
Considering how it started out, I wasn't sure.
It took us
Yeah,
a
it
long
was-
time to get there, but
Yeah,
It was just down there at the entrance, wasn't it?
yeah, when it come with a lot property lines crossed over.
yeah, they originally their property did not technically touch Henfling Road, so it was a couple. I don't know if he was even a foot away, so they didn't actually have any frontage on it, and they had to negotiate with the neighbor to get frontage to actually enter onto that county road. It's a very short county road, but it is county.
I think there's, 2 houses on this now, I think. I saw one that was up part way, and then there's one all the way up on top, I think, one of. Anybody have any concerns with this one? Everything in good shape, Chad, as far as
Yeah, again, we've been up there. We've looked at the roads. We're in good shape on it.
How many years ago was that? We
motion
discussed
approved?
that 3 years ago?
This one started in 2009. So,
Okay, that's been a while.
yeah,
It's been a struggle.
It has
Yeah,
been.
I
Yeah,
remember all that.
I gotta give Cecil credit, he got persevered through it. There's been times I had to fight this, see you later.
It's a thick file if anybody ever wants to look at it.
Motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to
Second.
approve.
I'll second.
Second.
If he does, okay.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? So moved, Chad.
Okay.
Steve, I don't remember.
Is that it for the,
Yeah, pretty much. I'll give you a quick update. Sierra just mentioned to me she's working on a feasibility study, looking for some funding on a trail from Oakland to Harrington Manor. So I don't have a whole lot of other details, but that's something we can kind of keep an eye on. And then the other thing, for those who weren't here last week, we had a pretty good discussion about a couple items potentially to, or a couple issues in the Deep Creek watershed. So one was a large accessory building that had been built in the site of the old Point View Inn restaurant. And there were some questions about that. It does comply with setbacks. It's a very lenient setback there. But we had a discussion about whether that was something that we should be concerned about happening. You know, more accessory buildings really close to property lines. So the Planning Commission last time directed staff to prepare some information. I was going on vacation a couple weeks, so I didn't have time to do it. But we're going to try to do that in the future. So different ideas to consider, you know, is that something we want to perhaps amend in the ordinance? Is it potentially going to be an issue in the future that we need to address? We could look at things like limiting the size of accessory buildings. We could change the setbacks to keep them away from roads. So those are things to kind of, I just want to put that on everybody's radar.
Sure, we need to look at all that. I think it's time. It's been 50 years. And, you know, some of the things are modified. Where it used to be, 14 units could be built on a town center lot, now it's down to 10. But I just think that all needs really looked at hard over the next couple of years, because, I mean, that's just a shame what's happened with that property.
Yeah, so town center has very lenient setbacks to start with. So town center, you've got a lot of Deep Creek Drive's town center. The area where like Uno's is on 219, a lot of that strip of 219 is town center.
Just past the where the coffee shop and stuff is, and then it goes residential over to about Point View, and then back to town center. And just feels like you know, at this point, 50 years later, it's time to take a good deep dive on some of that stuff and take a look at it.
So I just want everybody to be aware that kind of be thinking about that. So what we'll do is try to come up with some different options, whether, and it's always good to think, is this something we need to address, or is this an aberration? Is this a kind of a one-time thing, or is this something we need to look at and say we don't want it to continue to happen? So we can do that. The other thing we discussed were container homes. So there's one, I think, on Glendale maybe, that's a shipping container, and we've had a lot of questions about shipping containers for homes. There's been some comment about that. They are similar size to like a single wide trailer that are heavily restricted in the watershed. You have to have a special exception for those. So there's been some question about, well, should they be treated the same or similarly, where maybe it's a special exception or not permitted. So that's the other part. We're going to look up, try to come up with some definitions and some different ideas, and then we can discuss whether that's something that we want to allow to continue in the watershed, or if there should be some restrictions on it.
A container. You're being
Yeah.
serious?
Yeah, so they take shipping containers.
Well, I kind of already know where I'm going to lean, but okay.
We get a lot of questions about them, you know, all the
Really?
time. Yes. And I think a lot of it, people are maybe not thinking about, you know, it's a very preliminary discussion, and once we mention to them, well, it still has to meet building code. I mean, these are steel, and they're stacked on top of each other on ships, so they're probably pretty strong, although we don't have a lot of information on that, but we assume that structurally they're okay. But to meet building code, you've basically got to frame a little house inside of there, because you've got to meet insulation, and you're going to have to cut to make egress windows. You're going to have to find a way to get your...
Rust out from the sprinkler system?
You just have to do a sprinkler. Yeah, you still got to get a sprinkler system in there. You got to get your mechanicals in there. So I think a lot of times once people realize that it's not as easy as just dropping it and then I move in next week, they realize, well, there's still a lot of money involved in doing this. I'm basically building a little tiny home inside a shipping container.
I keep waiting for a Lego house.
Yeah, a lot of people lose it. But we are, I wouldn't say bombarded, but we get these type of questions all the time. You know, and we look at it like, if it has the elements of a bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen, it's a dwelling unit, it's a house. It doesn't really matter whether it's a shipping container or a mansion, it's still a house, so it has to meet all the building codes for that. But people are looking for lots of different ways to do that, so that's just something to consider. You know, are there certain things that we
Like
do?
I told you last time, that the people that now are taking old school buses and buying them and converting them into homes, you know, Airbnbs and stuff. I mean, some of the ideas they don't come up with are just, I mean, it's fantastic when it's finished, but is that, you want to set an old school bus in the middle of you know, an area like this, you know, make a home out of it, that's what I said, it's,
Yeah,
the
there's
other issue, I think, is coming as tree houses at some point.
Yeah, and we've had tree houses built in the county. They weren't in the watershed, but they basically built them as homes. They put sprinklers in them and everything, so they complied. So the ordinances and the building code, in one sense, doesn't really get into what it looks like from the outside too much. It's looking, does it meet these structural and safety requirements? So the question is, in the watershed, do you want to control that? Now, you can very easily define container home and say it's not permitted or a special exception. Other things, the ordinance has never really got into aesthetics very much. It's never really got into what things look like, and that could be a dangerous road to start down. Yeah, so we have to be careful with that because that's very subjective. But if there are specific types of homes that aren't appropriate in the watershed, we can consider that. So we will try to get some information. Again, I was out a lot of April, so I didn't have time to work.
Something else I read about was called a barn dominium. Have you seen any of that?
Yeah, no, those
You
are
seen that,
pretty
Bruce? I mean, I haven't read the whole page, but it's called
Why
a
is
barn
it called
dominium.
a barn dominium?
I think I think they use that phrase, but condominium deals with ownership of land, and so I think it's
I think
confusing.
they build they built a whole building like a barn or something like that, and they divide it up into,
Yeah. So, and again, if somebody said, I want to convert my barn to a house, we wouldn't get into whether it was a barn. We would say, if you can comply with building code, you can do it. So we might have to ask, you know, if it's a 150-year-old building, we have to say, we don't know what any of this lumber, you know, it's not going to be typical lumber. Get an engineer in there to give us a grade on it. And as long as you can meet the insulation and safety and egress requirements, we would allow people to
put the
proceed.
wedding venue in, a couple of them, you know what I'm saying? Like the one in Grantsville, just trying to get everything up to code.
Yeah, that was a little different because it was commercial.
Right, I know,
Yeah,
I mean,
so single family, there's a lot to do with a single family home. There are blower door tests, there are very strict insulation requirements and everything. But if you can comply with that, we don't necessarily judge what it looks like from the outside. So you know, there's a lot of, you could have flexibility there. But
They converted that stable on the old Camp Naotti into a house, I don't know, 30 years ago now probably. But, you know, and it came out great.
On this, some of the looks I saw, the pictures, they were pretty fascinating. I mean, it was a pretty neat concept.
The barn dominium. Yeah.
I mean, probably the barn's going to go like this, and but they kind of blended it all in nice, and you know, they didn't change much the outside of it.
sprinkler requirements make those things tougher, you know, in the insulation and things like that. But it's possible.
Can you have a mobile home in a watershed right now?
You'd have to have a special exception.
It has to be a special
Yeah,
exception.
and there are some specific requirements. It talks about the board should look at proximity to the lake and things like that. So, how prevalent they are in the neighborhood. So, you know, the watershed is big. You have places 495 or in the northern parts that aren't necessarily very close to the lake, you know, where they may be appropriate, and the board may look at one of those differently if it was a lakefront lot. So, in the case of special exception. So, that is one option. With container homes, we could use kind of that same criteria for trailers or so. So we'll try to give you guys some options and
That's
just
what you're looking
different
into,
ways
the
to look at it.
options.
Yeah, we'll try to prepare some things and then we can sit down and think through those.
So if we pass something, that's got to go to the deep group.
Yeah. So the zoning
Watershed
ordinance,
zoning
the zoning ordinance says at any time a citizen can submit something for an amendment, or you all can say, we think there's something here in the ordinance that we want to amend, and we send it to the county commissioners, and they have to have a public hearing, and then they would have the final say whether they want to amend it after a public hearing.
Bill, last meeting, you weren't here, but I think Liz coined it as affordable housing. So these avenues to try to, you know, make it more
I
affordable.
figured that would be what people would call it, because it is, but it just may not be appropriate for mixing in amongst.
And like Chad said too, after you have to meet those requirements, maybe it's not as affordable, you know.
And I think it's always important to balance the Deep Creek area with the rest of the county. You know, the rest of the county is not zoned. There are a lot of options to do things, you know, out of the ordinary or single wides or so. In the rest of the county, is it appropriate in the Deep Creek area? You know, where we have a different focus there in some ways with some of the vacation homes. So I think that's good to balance that there are a lot of options in the county overall. Deep Creek, maybe we can be stricter there. So those are all things we have to, that you all have to
It
consider.
could also be termed as unique housing too.
Yeah.
People like that. Some people will pay for that
Mm-hmm.
to be unique.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I feel like in cities and like Airbnbs and stuff, it becomes like these like hip sort of communities that they'll be building out of the containers or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there could be different perspectives about it, you know. But whenever you just first hear, or if you haven't like seen one that's been renovated. But I also agree with what you're saying that they're not going to be inexpensive to make them these like hip homes that you are seeing on Instagram or Pinterest
Yes.
or whatever.
I think that's what we
Yeah.
see a lot of. Somebody sees
Yeah.
something really cool and they say, well, I could do that. I can have that done in about a month. And then once we kind of say, well, we got to do all these things, like, well, it's not as simple.
Yeah.
Can't just throw a cot and a bottle of water in there.
Yeah. And a lot of these things too, you can do it very cool and hip, or you can just toss one in and move in. So that's where we kind of have to find a balance of, we can't always control the end result or how well
Yeah.
somebody does. But
Right.
that's true of
You
any house. You know, you
Yeah.
can build a very simple house. You can put a double wide in and make it look very nice. You know, there's different, we have limits to what we can control aesthetically, because that's very subjective. And I think that's something we don't want to get too deep into unless we have very, very clear standards for that. Because you know, we as a staff, we certainly don't want to be making that decision of what looks good. You know, that we don't want to put our opinion into it. So.
Chad, back to the town center discussion. One thing that's occurred to me, and I don't mean to keep picking on that person there on the corner, but in Lake Residential, we have a averaging for height that we use.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me like that particular application there, if somehow we could, if that applied to that, because it's two separate buildings, so I'm assuming it doesn't apply. If
It
somehow that
applies.
applied.
Well, you have two different categories. So for the single family home, the main building, main structure, you have a 50-foot height. So height has two components to it. You have an overall height. So if a building's on a slope, you're going from the very lowest part, like if it's a walkout basement, to the very top point of the roof. That is 50 foot. The other part of it is an average. So it's the mid-level of the roof, the highest and lowest parts of the roof. So you go in the middle. And then the mean level of the abutting ground. So if you got a house on a steep slope, you're going kind of halfway up the slope, halfway up the roof. That's one measurement. So on a house, that's 35 and 50. If it's an accessory building like this, it's the same criteria, but the overall height is 32, and the mean in between the slope and the roof is 20.
I'm just saying as a suggestion of something you might want to look at as you're looking at ways to maybe change that we're looking into these things. If that was applied, I'm assuming that wasn't applied because it's two different structures. Like if you applied that average, if you said, hey, in town center, we're going to take the average of all structures, I think that would have brought that one. That would have been way too high if you'd used it. Just as an idea of some way to control some of this stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you would. I'm not sure how you do that because there's different components with the roofs and things like that. I'm not sure how you would figure out how would you figure out what those two, because they're separate structures. I'm not sure about that.
What elevation would you start from?
Well, we're taking the high and the low.
Well, that's what I'm saying,
But
in
now,
that case,
now they're doing a high and low of the house and a high and low
Right.
of the garage. To me, what makes that project particularly disturbing is how high that garage is.
Oh, no, I agree.
If it was brought down, somehow we can control the height of it. I don't think it would be, I think we need to look at it all, as Bill said, but that is, to me, of that particular application, is the overall most offensive thing, the height of that thing.
And we can look
I
in.
get the question, that building would have been attacked, that'd come into play, right?
It would have, but then you have to look at all that. You know, you can have a very large roof that's tied together, and that average of that roof may actually be pretty far down because of, we have houses with very large roofs that are all tied together and they all flow, so that midpoint comes down pretty far. If it were all tied together, it would depend on whether the roofs were all tied together. It says in the ordinance the highest roof, so if it was not.
What I guess I'm saying is that would have been, if that's connected, some way to walk that, or breezeway or whatever, the lowest point down to lakefront, and the highest point, you understand what I mean, is where that roof goes up on there, that would help.
Yeah, I don't know if the roof of the accessory building is higher than the roof of the house or not.
It is
it?
by,
I don't drive by it that often, so you guys probably see it
That's the
more.
whole point of my.
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying, if that was attached, it would be handled under different circumstances.
That's what
Or-
I'm saying, if, and I'm just throwing this out there, if that was, if,
Considered one structure.
yes, if you could consider for the property, the high and the low points of the buildings on the property, rather than the high and the low point of the house and the high and low point of the garage, it would maybe possibly keep this from happening.
The only thing I see happen with that would be, especially, how many of these places do we approve where the house sits down here, and your garage, that detached garage sits up here, and it sits way up in the air, because you have to build a retaining wall, or build a wall up,
Right.
because the elevation changes.
Yeah, you could have a situation like that even in Lake Residential where we don't want accessory buildings down near the lake. So we say you can go a little closer to the road. You can put them 25 foot from the road. You may have a house that's down here, an accessory building that's higher. So
I mean, that's gonna be, I agree with what, there's gonna be some ways we gotta look at it, but I'm saying, that's one thing I think would work against you a lot of ways, because then all those garages have the floor, the rooms above them, maybe have to be sacrificed to get the median height requirement,
and all this is exacerbated because you're dealing with a very tiny lot.
Correct.
Lake Residential, you have an acre lot, things are spread out. It probably doesn't feel.
I think the comment was made too, there's 2 more lots there, 2 more buildable lots there.
There are a couple of them.
Plus it's got 2 different color blues,
Yeah,
which even makes it worse. I mean,
they're fairly close,
and,
but you can
well, it'd be
distinguish
one
them.
thing if one was light blue and one was dark blue or whatever, but you got a
It's
royal
really
blue
close.
and a kind of darker blue or whatever the heck it is.
They're not far off, but they are
They're
distinguishable.
far enough.
We're talking about aesthetic zoning now.
They're a lot further than the 2 buildings are from each other. though.
Yeah.
We need to add you into something.
I don't have anything to do.
Okay. Don't say that in public.
I hope you guys know better than that.
Sierra has plenty to do. So we will prepare kind of a guideline, hopefully, to kind of just give some parameters for the discussion and see different ways maybe we can go with that. But be thinking about it, because I think they are important issues. And I think I mentioned this last time with zoning. We're always trying to say, is something, if it's just an aberration, maybe we don't want to go too far and create a bunch of rules that was based on one thing that just happened once. On the other hand, we're always willing to say, is this beginning of trends that maybe we wish we would have stopped earlier? So, you kind of have to have that.
I think the third thing, though, that's real important with all this, though, is the fact that the vast majority of these properties that are being anything done with are not being done in a mixed use at all. They're basically residential properties, and people are taking residential properties and trying to maximize which,
Space.
I think in some ways it's hurting the property values around them and everything else. And I just think that if you still were having a fairly mixed use, or what the reason for what Town Center was originally thought out 50 years ago, that's one thing. But maybe it's time to start looking at this more from the perspective of, if you're developing these things residentially, maybe they should be more residentially dealt with.
Well, some places do have maximum lot coverage too, of a percentage. Like you can only cover a certain amount of a lot. We've never done that in terms of a percentage. We have setbacks, but you can basically fill those setbacks. You still have stormwater and things like that to meet parking, but we've never limited it from that perspective.
I think under most markets, it doesn't matter. But I think because of the acceleration of that market from 20 to 22, those things can happen at any point, and they can be driven by something that nobody could ever foresee, right? Pandemic. And so that's where I think this needs looked at, because who would have ever thought about a pandemic and at that, but who would have thought any of that stuff in 1975? There wasn't sewer then.
Yeah. There's a lot of things, solar wasn't an issue in 1970, but we've seen a lot of things come up that weren't issues.
That's why I think it's time to go through that stuff and say, okay, are there things that we can look at to kind of protect things, or they should be protected?
And if you remember the last time we did the comp plan back in 2008, and in 2010, we followed with a major update to zoning and subdivision ordinance. So the last comp plan, it had some recommendations and things for us to look at. It didn't have as many things that we had to do, but we've kind of discussed this in the office too. Is it time to take a bigger look at the ordinance as a whole, rather than, we've done some amendments recently, the solar one, some of the things with special exceptions and things we've changed, but that is something too that if the planning commission wants to say, maybe it's time to take a little closer look at that. It's been 13 years now since we took a close look. Are there other things that we want to look, and we could pull out the things that we recommended from the comp plan and do that as well. So that'll be a lot of work, but it may be time to take a more comprehensive look at it rather than just kind of reacting to some of these issues.
Maybe worth looking at like some other like zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
Seeing how other people do it before we take a look at ours, because I think like, I don't know, Frederick, they like changed their stuff in terms of like character and landscape and things like that. And there's other ways to do it than how we do it.
Yeah, there's different things.
And kind of see those examples in practice might be worthwhile.
Yeah, we had somebody come into us one day and asking about agricultural uses. Like we allow agriculture, but what if somebody wanted to do a brewery on site where they're growing their hops, and the ordinance doesn't really allow those things. So that was something that we had talked about in the ordinance. Maybe that's something we want to allow in their agricultural based a winery or something like that. That's not real clear in the watershed right now whether that's allowed. So there are other things that we all kind of keep our own little lists of things that could be updated, but that's if the commission.
Well, the other
wants to
thing
do
too
that.
that does come into town center that wasn't in play back in the 70s was when they redid the whole dock stuff on the lake in the mid-80s, and I think that in some ways impacts at least the lakefront portion of town center zone.
Yeah, I think town center, it was envisioned probably as where you have mixed use. You've got your commercial things, you've got some houses too. It's definitely, you're probably seeing more residential than commercial. That's kind of hard for us to push people one way or the other though. Anything else on that discussion?
Anything else?
Did you mention my
I quickly did. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything more about it.
So like I presented a priority letter, just trying to move some projects forward. So waiting for DNR's blessing to put in an application to do a feasibility study from Oakland to Harrington Manor. Like no assumptions, just is it possible? What's the best way? How much would it cost? And then from there we'd probably do like a concept plan. I put in another grant the following year for like a concept plan, and then we can get construction dollars. So like 3 years maybe to make that happen. That'd be exciting, right? And then the other one is like concept plan, connect Oakland to Harrington Manor. And we also have some funding for Meadow Mountain Trail, which will do some rec trail funding to supplement the funding we received. And then Laughlin, their boardwalk needs pre-decked, so we put in an application for that too. Lots of movement on that stuff. So,
Anybody else?
I'll keep you posted on those plans if I get the grants.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
New member?
No.
We'd like to let everybody speak out, speak your mind. All right, next meeting is what, June 7th?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
All right, you're adjourned.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
I just signed the paper, Chad.
Yes.
I don't think it's meant.
Hi, I'm Julie.
Are we off speaker?
Yeah, I was here.
Are we off